Good evening, all. Today we're headed well back in time to the early days of the sport to look at the Bentley 3-liter, the company's first vehicle as well as their first to win at Le Mans. In fact, I think they're the only automaker to win Le Mans with their first vehicle manufactured, notwithstanding a potential argument in favor of the McLaren F1, since that was their first road car, but not the first thing they had built with four wheels and an engine. Anyway, first, a quick summary of how Bentley came to be. The Bentley Motor Company was founded by this chap, Walter Owen Bentley, usually referred to as W.O. He started out as an apprentice engineer working for the Great Northern Railway at the tender age of 16, working on the design and manufacture of railway equipment. However, he found the work to be generally unrewarding and instead returned to school, taking a degree in theoretical engineering from King's College and racing motorcycles on the side. He then started an automobile dealership with his brother, selling French DFPs. This rapidly morphed into modifying the vehicles to improve their performance and take them racing, as W.O. considered that the best form of advertising available at the time. Bentley modified DFPs set several records at Brooklands in the lead-up to the First World War. During the war, he engineered and manufactured rotary aircraft engines in conjunction with Humber, again using modifications of a French design. These engines would see extensive use in Sopwith aircraft in particular, especially the Camel, and after the war, W.O. was rewarded with an MBE and £8,000 for his contribution to the war effort. That's £8,000 in currency, not £8,000 of bananas or scrap metal or something else. This capital infusion formed the seed money that would grow into Bentley Motors Limited. Working with colleagues from his wartime experience, they designed a large, highly advanced engine that rapidly acquired a reputation for its output and durability. The lion's share of the engineering work on the engine was done by one Mr. Clive Gallup. His design was in part derived from a pre-war Mercedes Grand Prix vehicle, engine number MN3654, that was confiscated from a London dealership at the start of the war and inspected by a consortium of individuals, largely led by Rolls-Royce, but also featuring anyone else who was invited to attend, including the aforementioned Mr. Gallup and Mr. Bentley. He turned these learnings into a 3-liter straight-4 engine with 4 valves per cylinder and an overhead camshaft. It used 2 spark plugs per cylinder, common in aero engines at the time for reliability and redundancy, but rare in automobile engines, and in fact remains fairly rare to this day in automobile engines. Also unusual for the time was the use of dual carburetors, which improved power output. The cylinder block and head were cast as a single unit, not terribly unusual at the time, and a feature shared with the much smaller Bugattis with which they would later compete, although this did complicate repairs in the relatively unlikely event that they were needed. The engine was generally designed to deliver strong low-end torque, which served it well in competition applications, and the engine produced between 70 and something north of 100 horsepower, depending on its state of tune. 3 power options were available from the factory, labeled blue, red, or green, and denoted by the color of the badge on the radiator. Blue-badged or blue-label cars were the least powerful and capable of about 80 miles an hour, or 130 kph. This coming out of an era where there was a general conception that going anything more than about 25 miles an hour was injurious to your health. 80 miles an hour in a road car must have been absolutely terrifying. For further reference, the Ford Model T, admittedly about 10 years, released about 10 or 15 years prior, was capable of somewhere in the neighborhood of 40. The red label, or speed models, were good for 90 miles an hour, and the green label, or super sports models, were capable of greater than 100 miles an hour, all guaranteed speeds by the factory. Humber provided the chassis, although not the body. This was the era of coach-built automobiles. And the chassis from Humber was so renowned for its robustness that it prompted Ettore Bugatti to call the 3-liter the fastest lorry in the world. Power went to the rear wheels through a 4-speed, unsynchronized manual gearbox, as synchromesh had not been invented in 1921 and initially debuted on the 1929 Cadillac. Nevertheless, and equally impressive for the time, was the extended warranty that a helpful person sold me for one of these Bentleys when they called me earlier this week. As usual, I jest, but there is more than a grain of truth contained therein. The Bentleys were actually offered with a 5-year powertrain warranty on the lower tune vehicles and a 1-year warranty on the competition spec green label cars. As best as my research can determine, this was also unusual for the time and reflected the confidence that Bentley had in their product. But of course, this is a channel focused on racing, at least for the time being, and Bentley built its reputation on the sporting pretensions and prowess of their automobiles. Less than a year after production began, the company began entering the 3-liter in any motorsports events they could find. Hill climbs, races at Brooklands, the Indy 500, actually, and even the 1922 Isle of Man Tourist Trophy, where they managed to win the team award as they were the only team to fully complete the race. However, it's with Le Mans that Bentley is most inextricably linked, and the inaugural 1923 race saw a privateer 3-liter entered by John Duff, holder of many of Bentley's and other manufacturers' records at Brooklands, and Frank Clement, the Bentley test driver at the time. A skeptical Mr. Bentley also came along for the race, remarking that he thought the idea of racing for 24 hours nonstop was absolutely ludicrous, bordering on insanity. Well, the 3-liter managed to come fourth overall, despite some difficulties with their headlamps and, I believe, with a punctured fuel tank at one point, and WO was fully converted. The next year, this time with factory support, the same vehicle and driver pairing was entered, and despite losing over an hour in the pits to change the rear tires, difficulties arose due to apparent tampering that prevented a wheel from being removed, they took home top honors with 1 lap in hand over the second-placed Lorraine Dietrich. The next 2 years, however, saw struggles for the team at the French race, despite increasing efforts, with DNFs for all the entries due to accidents, engine difficulties, and in one instance, just running out of fuel too early. It wasn't until 1927 that, despite an enormous accident in the early hours of the race at Maison Blanche that affected all 3 Bentleys entered, that the 3-liter of Dudley Benjafield and Sammy Davis, not Sammy Davis Jr., took home a second win for the manufacturer. It was also the last victory for the 3-liter cars, as they had undertaken to replace them with a newer and more powerful 4.5-liter model that would then go on to take home Bentley's third race victory in 1928. A great number of 3-liters still exist today, however, including the first race-winning vehicle, which we've been seeing here pictured in the Le Mans Museum for the Centenary exhibition. They can be seen at historic races and rallies, particularly in Europe, but I would dearly love for one to show up at the Sebring or Daytona Historics as well. If any of you, dear listeners, should happen to be US-based or just particularly well-heeled and Europe-based and would like to enter one of your vehicles in the Sebring or Daytona Historics at the end of this year, do get in touch. I can help with some of the paperwork and lodging figurings out, but I don't have one myself as I'm not that wealthy. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching, and for this evening's call to action, not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube.
Like, comment, subscribe.
It's finally really getting to be hurricane time down here in the southern U.S., despite a mention of it several weeks or perhaps a couple of months ago, and I'm going to take this opportunity to remind anyone living in the general area to double-check your storm preparation supplies before what looks like a potentially very wet and windy week ahead next week. Have a good evening, all.